Late at night, John was driving along a desolate stretch of highway, the rhythmic thrum of his tires against the asphalt, the only sound breaking the stillness. The road was long and winding, cutting through thick forests and shadowy landscapes. The clock on his dashboard glowed 2 a.m., and he fought to keep his eyes open, fatigue threatening to pull him into sleep. The highway seemed to stretch infinitely ahead, swallowed by darkness on either side. His car's headlights sliced through the night, casting eerie shadows that danced and flickered, making the trees appear almost alive. The hum of the engine was a monotonous drone, a lullaby that threatened to pull him into unconsciousness. John's eyelids grew heavy, and he shook his head, trying to stave off sleep. Suddenly, in the beam of his headlights, John saw a figure standing by the side of the road. The person's thumb was outstretched in the universal gesture for a lift. John's heart skipped a beat. It was unusual to see anyone out here, especially at this hour. Against his better judgment, he slowed down and stopped, rolling down the window to get a better look. The hitchhiker was a young man, perhaps in his mid-20s, with disheveled hair and clothes that looked worn and dirty. His eyes were hollow, dark circles standing out against his pale skin. There was something off about him, something that made John's skin crawl, but he couldn't put his finger on it. A shiver ran down his spine, but he ignored it, driven by a sense of curiosity and a desire to help. John hesitated for a moment before unlocking the passenger door. The hitchhiker climbed in without a word, settling into the seat with a quiet sigh. The car was filled with an unsettling silence as John pulled back onto the road. He introduced himself, trying to break the ice, but the young man remained silent, staring out into the darkness with a distant, haunted look in his eyes. Minutes passed, the silence growing heavier, almost oppressive. Finally, the hitchhiker spoke in a low, gravelly voice. He asked if John knew about the haunted highway they were traveling on. The question hung in the air, laden with ominous weight. John's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his mind racing. He had heard local legends and urban myths about ghostly apparitions and unexplained accidents, but he had never taken them seriously. The hitchhiker began to share eerie stories about the highway. His voice was monotonous, almost hypnotic, as he recounted tales of ghostly figures appearing in the rearview mirror, only to vanish when the driver turned around. He spoke of phantom vehicles that would suddenly appear on the road, forcing drivers into deadly accidents, and of a spectral woman in white who wandered the roadside, searching for her lost child. John listened, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. The stories were chilling, filled with details that felt too real to be mere urban legends. The hitchhiker's voice wove a tapestry of horror, drawing him deeper into the tales. Each story seemed to build on the last, painting a picture of a cursed road that claimed the lives of those who traveled it. As the night wore on, John noticed that the landmarks described in the stories began to match the scenery outside his window. The hitchhiker's tales of twisted trees, abandoned cars, and eerie silence all seemed to come to life around them. The realization slowly dawned on him. They were driving on the haunted highway from the stories. As the hitchhiker's voice droned on, John felt a chill settle over him, the air in the car growing colder by the minute. The stories seemed to seep into the very fabric of the night, casting an eerie pall over the road ahead. John glanced at the hitchhiker, who continued to speak in that same unsettling monotone, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the darkness. the hitchhiker recounted the tale of a young couple who had taken this very road one stormy night. They had seen a figure in white standing by the roadside, drenched from the rain, and had decided to offer her a ride. The woman had climbed into the back seat, her eyes empty and devoid of life. She had spoken only once to warn them of a sharp curve ahead, before disappearing without a trace. The couple had been found the next morning, their car mangled in a horrific crash at the exact spot where the woman had warned them. John's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he looked ahead, half expecting to see the ghostly woman appear in his rearview mirror. The road seemed to stretch on endlessly, shrouded in darkness, the trees lining either side like silent sentinels. The hitchhiker's voice continued, weaving another tale, this one about a truck driver who had picked up a stranded motorist. The motorist had spoken of an accident up ahead, where his family was trapped in their car. The truck driver had sped ahead to help, only to find an empty, abandoned vehicle. When he returned to his truck, the motorist was gone, and the truck driver never made it to his destination, vanishing without a trace. The hitchhiker paused, his gaze shifting to John, who felt a shiver run down his spine. The tales felt too real, too vivid, to be mere fabrications. Each story seemed to resonate with the road they were traveling on, the landmarks matching up with eerie precision. John's mind raced as he tried to rationalize the unease gnawing at him. He wondered if it was just the late hour and the darkness playing tricks on his mind. But the hitchhiker was relentless, launching into another story, this one about a family traveling home from a vacation. They had seen a broken-down car on the side of the road and had stopped to help. The driver had been a man in distress, claiming his wife and child were missing. The family had searched the woods nearby, only to find the remains of the man's family, long dead and decayed. When they returned to the road, their car was gone, and they were never seen again. The hitchhiker's voice was a low whisper now, filled with a palpable dread. John's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the road signs and mile markers the hitchhiker described were the very ones he had passed. The landmarks, the twisted tree, the rusted-out car, the abandoned gas station were all there, just as the stories described. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They were on the haunted highway, the same cursed road from the hitchhiker's tales. The sense of unease grew, gnawing at John's nerves. He tried to shake off the feeling, to focus on the road, but the hitchhiker's stories had taken root in his mind. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking presence, every flicker of light a ghostly apparition. John's anxiety mounted, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He felt trapped, as if the road itself was drawing him deeper into its sinister embrace. The hitchhiker's final story was about a lone traveler, much like John himself, who had picked up a hitchhiker on a dark, lonely road. The hitchhiker had told stories of a haunted highway, stories that grew more terrifying with each passing mile. The traveler had tried to escape, to outrun the horrors, but it was too late. He became the next ghost story. His fate sealed the moment he stopped to offer a ride. John's blood ran cold as he realized the hitchhiker was no longer just telling stories. He was recounting John's own journey, the very night they were living through. Panic set in as John gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The hitchhiker's words echoed in his mind, a grim prophecy that seemed to unfold with each passing mile. The realization hit John like a wave, washing over him with an intensity that left him breathless. He could no longer dismiss the hitchhiker's stories as mere fabrications or the product of a wandering mind. The eerie coincidences were too precise, too unnerving to ignore. As the hitchhiker fell silent, John's thoughts spiraled into a vortex of fear and confusion. The car's headlights pierced through the night, illuminating the road ahead in stark relief. The twisted tree the hitchhiker had described loomed on the side of the road, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. John's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing the growing dread within him. He glanced at the hitchhiker, who stared ahead, a knowing look in his eyes. John's mind raced back to the beginning of his journey. He had been driving for hours, eager to reach his destination, when he had seen the lone figure by the roadside. The hitchhiker had seemed harmless enough, just another traveler in need of a ride. But now, John questioned his judgment. Who was this man? And why did his story seem to predict the very path they were on? The radio in the car crackled to life, a burst of static that made John jump. He fiddled with the dial, trying to find a clear station, but all he could hear was the faint sound of an old broadcast, a news report from years past. The voice spoke of accidents and disappearances on this very highway, recounting the same stories the hitchhiker had shared. John's hands trembled as he turned off the radio, the silence in the car now heavy and oppressive. The hitchhiker spoke again, his voice low and measured. He told of a fog that would roll in, thick and impenetrable, swallowing the road and everything on it. Travelers would find themselves lost, their cars stopping inexplicably, leaving them stranded in the middle of nowhere. Those who ventured into the fog never returned, their bodies never found. John's pulse quickened as he noticed the first wisps of fog creeping onto the road, the white tendrils curling around the tires. Panic set in as the fog thickened, reducing visibility to mere feet. John slowed the car, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The hitchhiker continued, his voice eerily calm, describing the disoriented travelers who would hear whispers in the fog, voices calling out to them, luring them away from their vehicles. The fog seemed to have a life of its own, shifting and swirling, creating ghostly shapes that danced on the periphery of John's vision. The road signs and mile markers were now obscured, the familiar landmarks swallowed by the dense fog. John felt a growing sense of dread, the realization that he was now part of the hitchhiker's final story, the lone traveler doomed to become the next ghost story. The hitchhiker's tales had taken on a horrifying reality, each one a prelude to the nightmarish scenario John now found himself in. John's thoughts were a chaotic jumble as he tried to make sense of the situation. He questioned whether he could escape the fate that seemed to have been written for him. Desperation clawed at him, urging him to turn back, to find another route. But the fog was relentless, and the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, a never-ending ribbon of asphalt winding through the darkness. The hitchhiker's voice broke through John's frantic thoughts, speaking of the last moments of those who had traveled this cursed highway. They had all felt the same sense of impending doom, the same helplessness that now gripped John. Their stories had ended in tragedy, their lives cut short by the malevolent force that haunted this road. John's breath came in ragged gasps as he fought to keep his composure. He knew he had to find a way out, to escape the haunting presence that seemed to surround him. The hitchhiker's stories played over and over in his mind, each one a reminder of the fate that awaited him. The road ahead was shrouded in fog, the way forward uncertain and fraught with danger. The hitchhiker fell silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. John felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the hitchhiker knew what was coming. He was part of the story now, a key player in the unfolding nightmare. The fog thickened, the visibility reduced to nothing. John felt the car slow to a crawl, the engine sputtering as if it too sensed the doom that lay ahead. John's mind raced as he searched for a way out, a glimmer of hope in the oppressive darkness. The hitchhiker's stories had led him here, to this moment, and John knew he had to find the strength to break free. The road stretched out before him, an endless expanse of fog and shadows, and John felt the weight of the hitchhiker's gaze upon him. He knew that the next move was his, the choice between surrendering to the inevitable or fighting for his life. The fog pressed in, the air heavy with tension, and John felt the clock ticking down to his final moment. John's hands shook as he struggled to maintain control of the car. The engine sputtered again, the headlights cutting through the thick fog like twin blades. His mind raced, desperate for a solution, a way to escape the doom that seemed inevitable. The hitchhiker's eerie calmness only added to his mounting terror. He felt trapped, the road ahead an endless, featureless expanse of white. The fog seemed to pulse with a life of its own, whispering secrets and lies into John's ears. He could barely see the hood of his car, let alone the road beyond. His pulse pounded in his ears, each beat a reminder of the fleeting moments left to him. The hitchhiker's final story replayed in his mind, the tale of the last traveler who had vanished into the fog, never to be seen again. John's breath came in shallow gasps as he strained to see through the fog. The car lurched and then stalled, the engine dying with a final mournful sputter. Panic seized him as he realized he was stranded, alone in the middle of nowhere. The fog closed in around the car, a suffocating shroud that blocked out the world. He fumbled with the keys, trying to restart the engine, but it was no use. The car was dead. The hitchhiker remained unnervingly still, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. John could see the faint outline of his reflection in the rearview mirror, his expression one of resigned acceptance. John's heart raced as he unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door, stepping out into the swirling mist. The air was thick with moisture, each breath a struggle. He glanced back at the hitchhiker, but the man made no move to follow him. John took a few tentative steps away from the car, the fog swallowing him whole. The road beneath his feet felt uncertain, each step echoing in the silence. He called out, his voice a feeble croak in the dense air, but there was no response. The fog absorbed his words, turning them into nothingness. He could barely see his own hand in front of his face, the mist clinging to him like a second skin. A sense of profound isolation settled over John. He was alone in this ghostly landscape, with no sign of help or hope. The hitchhiker's stories had become his reality, and he was living out the final, horrifying chapter. The whispers in the fog grew louder, more insistent, filling his mind with dread. He could hear the faint echo of footsteps behind him, but when he turned, there was no one there. Desperation clawed at him as he wandered further from the car. The fog seemed to thicken with each step, the world fading into an impenetrable wall of white. He stumbled over unseen obstacles, the ground uneven and treacherous. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, as if the fog itself were alive, taunting him. He could hear voices calling his name, beckoning him deeper into the mist. John's mind began to unravel, the line between reality and nightmare blurring. He could no longer tell if the voices were real or a product of his growing hysteria. He called out again, his voice breaking with fear and exhaustion, but the only answer was the relentless whisper of the fog. He felt as if he were walking in circles, the landscape changing with each step, offering no sense of direction. In the distance he saw a faint light, a flickering beacon in the sea of fog. Hope surged within him, and he stumbled towards it, his legs weak and unsteady. The light grew brighter, cutting through the mist, and John felt a glimmer of salvation. As he drew closer, he realized it was a car's headlights, and his heart leapt. He called out, waving his arms, but the light remained still, unresponsive. When he reached the source of the light, John froze in horror. It was his own car, the headlights flickering ominously in the fog. He had come full circle, his desperate journey leading him back to where he had started. The hitchhiker was gone, leaving the car empty and cold. John's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, the realization crashing over him like a wave. The fog closed in, tighter and more suffocating than before. John's mind fractured under the weight of his despair, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. He was trapped, caught in a never-ending loop of terror and isolation. The stories the hitchhiker had told were not just tales, but a grim prophecy, one that John could not escape. As the last vestiges of hope slipped away, John surrendered to the fog, his mind and body succumbing to the relentless grip of the haunted highway. The whispers enveloped him, their voices a chorus of lost souls, and John became just another ghost story, his fate sealed on the desolate road. The headlights of his car flickered once more before being swallowed entirely by the fog, leaving nothing but silence and darkness in their wake.